Hi everyone, this is Dan Scott. I'm answering week three's question from Jordan Martin, um, where she is approaching the topic of environmental security from the context of her passion for environmental protection. Um, I respect her perspective on the matter, and I'm going to try to answer it to the best of my ability. But I'm also going to be addressing some of my own questions, concerns, thoughts, and things like that along the way. So first, her questions. Number one, the world has set rules and regulations when it comes to POWs and the use of chemical warfare. Should we also implement rules when it comes to the destruction of environments due to war? And two, in order to prevent the intentional destruction of environments during war as much as is allowed, should the offending country be fined or set under sanctions, such as the ones put on Iran? So, to respond first to question number one, I would say, sure, why not? Um, it's important to take care of the environment, obviously, but I am of the belief and of the experience of noticing that the Earth is a very resilient place. Um, it recovers from destruction quite well. And not that we shouldn't seek to take care of it and be good stewards of it, but it's also um, capable of a lot more than we may think at this point in time. Um, I've experienced wildfires where the plants start growing back within a couple of days. Um, but you also need to think about the fact that in warfare, um, it gets very destructive, especially in the events where they use weapons of mass destruction. In those situations, yes, there definitely need to be serious repercussions, but those are also already covered underneath other international sanctions and international laws. Um, but damage from conventional weapons uh, are much less destructive, and they take less time to recover from. You can also you can try to implement new rules and regulations, but in war, we also acknowledge the fact that that which would be unthinkable does become a viable option in many cases. Um, things like mass rape, torture, and genocide being prime examples. Nuclear attacks being among genocide, as pointed out in the text. Um, Chemical and biological weapons, they become valuable assets in weak state regimes that lack adequate conventional um, military forces to be able to neutralize a threat. Perfect example of this would be in Assad's Syrian regime right now. When you go back a couple years ago, and there were all the talk about going in because Assad crossed the red line of launching chemical weapon attacks, and it was what equalized the fight for him because he was not able to stand up against the rebels at the time. War by its very nature is destructive, but it's also become exponentially more so in recent times since the modernization of war. Um, what would regulations consider? That were developed now, what would they be considering excessive destruction in the 21st century war zones? Um, Another thought that I had was if soldiers aren't expected to be armed social workers, as Sheheen explains on page 148 in the text, are they then expected to be armed environmental defenders? Which is a question that I think is worth probing a little bit. Um, the problem with setting up new rules and regulations to mandate environmental protection in war zones, and from my perspective, is does humanity contain the moral fortitude to fight honorably and protect non-combatants and environments? I would say definitely yes in some places. I think overall the American military does try to do that. It's not always successful, and sometimes there are bad apples who do bad things. But that's anywhere, and that's any case. But we've also seen throughout history that there are those who don't care about human life. They don't care about human environments, and they will do whatever they well please. So moving on to question number two, I'd say that implementing fines and sanctions, it could be a good way of handling the problems, but who's going to make them pay? If North Korea, for instance, were to invade South Korea again and they carpet bombed much of the South's farmlands fines and sanctions could be imposed, but who's going to make them pay? Who actually thinks that they're going to care, seeing as they already have sanctions that have been crippling their economy for generations now? And who's going to make them comply if dear leader simply says no? So there's another thing to think about. Also, sanctions could further lead to an escalation in conflict. There's been a case made in recent years that I'm aware of, most notably from former Congressman Ron Paul, that sanctions are in fact an act of war. And there's debate about that, obviously. But by that logic, placing sanctions on an aggressor who's already violating war rules that protect the environment have the possibility of further destruction elsewhere. A second question I would consider is what if the country intentionally destroys its own environment, such as Stalin's scorched earth attacks in World War II against the Germans, where he sought to destroy his own land and destroy everything that was there so the Germans couldn't utilize it. I think a final question to consider is would it or could it be construed as a violation of if a conflict arises where the damage to the environment may stem from an interrupting flow of the grow season, which could also lead to a famine. And this was the case that happened in South Sudan a couple of years ago now. I believe it was 2013 or 14. So I guess just to conclude, because this video is getting a little long, I realize it sounds like I'm arguing against Jordan's suggestions, but I'm really not. I do think, however, that it's very important to examine these kind of situations and ideas from as many angles as possible to ensure success, because I firmly believe that human nature generally seems predisposed to evil unless there's a clear, conscious decision to do what's right and to do what's good. So in closing, I guess just to sum it all up, do I think there should be rules in place to protect the environment in war? Yeah, I mean, things like white phosphorus and Agent Orange are much more devastating to the environment in any given area than a flurry of arrows or charging cavalry everywhere. Should there be repercussions for those who violate like commonly agreed upon rules? If they're commonly agreed upon by the international community, then yeah, I think there should be some sanctions, some kind of consequence for their actions. But I do still question the effectiveness of it. Thanks for your time. Bye.